Thank you so much, and thank you to the member for Barrie Innisfil, who is giving all of the color commentary. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be able to have the opportunity to once again speak on this bill. And I think I could sum it up with a question that I was asked following last time that we spoke on this bill during the report stage. And it was a question that came from a Liberal member. And his only question was very simple. He came up to me and he said, "My name? Why do Conservatives hate childcare so much?" And I was dumbfounded because I really thought perhaps he missed my speech, although he was sitting in the chamber for the speech. I thought, oh my gosh, somehow there was an entire void here. And I just want to continue with all of the great work that my colleague from Battleford Lloyd Minister talked about, because she is on the front lines of this, not only being a member of the HUMA committee, but also being a mother, just like so many other individuals here who have young children that are needing care for their children. Yesterday, I actually was at Oxfam. I was at their report. And in this report, it was coming and looking at care in Canada. I wanted to look at both unpaid care and paid care. And one of the biggest things they talked about was, yes, we have this new child care program, all of those benefits, but the problem is at the end of the day, we are losing people in that sector. And exactly what our member from Peterborough Kawartha has talked about was the fact that we cannot retain people who are in this sector for a length of time. I was talking about $22 an hour in Langley, BC, just 5 years ago, and that is not keeping people in the sector because, let's be honest, the cost of living is just not making it so that people who have chosen to do these jobs that at one time may have seemed lower income, well, they're not being respected for the great work, and now they can't just afford to do something that they're passionate and love to do. What I want to do today, though, is read into the record because the member from Peterborough Kawartha Lakes had talked about that every single day there is a brand new article that we're seeing from the media. And so exactly what I did, I was thinking, I need to do this speech. You pop in childcare in Canada, and it just populates all of these stories, and it doesn't matter what part of the country you're from, whether you're in Nunavut, as I will have a media mention from there, or other parts of the country. They're all talking about the same things, and it's spots, and it's labor. And sometimes the labor issues create the spot issues and vice versa. And that is something that when this government came forward with this bill that they automatically had said, we want to enshrine this, I recall the minister, we want to enshrine this in legislation because of the Conservatives. So we know it was all political intentions. It really wasn't to do with children, but it's those political intentions, so they want to enshrine this in law. But they didn't take the time to do the work. And that's a lot of times when we're playing political games. We don't look at the consequences of our mistakes. So when we come and try to do amendments in committee, we're too busy trying to play partisan games that simple things like a labor force strategy is going to be denied because of the individual who has put that forward. Something that's really common in this House, that if you don't like the individual who sponsors something, you're just not going to support it. So that's just what we see in the House of Commons. So as I indicated, I have a number of articles, and I would like to read these because this is exactly what we talked about. And these articles were not written by Conservatives. They were written by journalists, people that are going around and reporting on what's happening in Canada. Not Conservative journalists. Looking at some of these, where are they coming from? Not Conservative journalists. People who are actually looking on the ground and addressing these issues. So the first thing I want to bring forward is something that was published on May 8th, written by Natasha O'Neill, who is a writer with CTV. And it indicates, and I'm going to read this into the record, so please stay with me. A new report details a lack of childcare spaces is at a crisis level in Canada. And why has it worsened? The report published in April of 2023 by the not-for-profit Childcare Resources and Research Unit shows just one spot in a childcare setting was available for 29% of children who need it. Holy shnikes, that is just horrific. One spot, like 29, just one spot for 29% of children? Yeah, okay, it's called Tommy Boy's Eyes. Okay, guys, you'd better like Chris Farley. We all have to like Chris Farley, but holy shnikes on this. I think one of the things that's driving the shortage of licensed spaces that childcare has been in the news a lot. So Moira Ballantyne, who is an advocate, and anyone who's been working in this will talk to her, and she's talked about the fact that, yeah, there is a huge demand for this. But what we see is the demand is not keeping up with what the government has put in place. And that is why, when we're talking about this bill, why are the Conservatives supporting it? Because, as we said, we are supporting this about childcare. But we have seen this being used as a political wedge each and every time. As the member, and that's why all I've ever heard is Conservatives voting against this. I'm not voting against children. I'm voting for families. I'm voting for women so that they can go to work. Members of the families can go to work. Men can go to work. Everybody in that family unit can ensure that their child has a place. And although I many times speak as a women's advocate, and I think it's because, you know, at that 8:59 when you're trying to get off the road to go into work and your child's sick and you need to find that last-minute childcare because you're trying to balance getting to work and having that job and keeping your children safe and cared for and sick, who are you going to call? Well, thanks, Mom, by the way, for all of those times that you're always available at those 8:59 phone call moments. So, but as I indicated, Ballantyne had said that the crisis is not new. Particularly getting access to licensed childcare is a problem. She said, governments for decades now have essentially relied on individual organizations, whether for-profit or not-for-profit, to set up childcare centers. And that is the reality of it. And I think we have to say, why do they do that? And that's because we're in Canada. That is because we cannot look at this incredible nation that we have from coast to coast and not look at the diversity of communities, population, the fact that, you know, I spoke to my friend from Saskatoon. To get from one edge of his riding to the other, it's 20 minutes. Well, I can tell you that for some people that are in Toronto, that might be 5 minutes, maybe walking, definitely not by car, that's 20. But in some of our ridings, it's 8 hours from door to door to get from one end to the other end. And so then put into that perspective what that looks like when it comes to populations in childcare and how you can find something that's going to be successful. That is why families have come up with, that is why families and businesses and many women have come up with business plans and business models so that they can support their community. It doesn't have to look like this or that, but they're filling in that gap. And that is why we are cautiously supporting this, because it is filling, we know that there are still gaps, and these gaps have to be filled in by other things. So I want to turn over to another piece, because this one I found was really interesting. And this is written by CBC, and it's Mike Crawley, and this was written on March 14th of 2023. And it was the headline here. Average ECE leaves sector after 3 years, indicates the regulator. So in this article, becoming a registered ECE, so which is early childhood educator, requires at least 2 years of post-secondary education with training in childhood development. However, compensation has lagged behind that with other sectors that also require a post-secondary diploma because the work of childcare is not valued, according to advocates. We are not babysitters, said Maxine Trorodowitz, and I'm so sorry, Maxine, I wish I read that properly, a registered ECE and supervisor of childcare at the West End of Toronto. And I think this goes back to the fact that at one time we saw that people who were ECEs, and I had worked on a childcare board back in the 90s and early 2000s, those rates of $15 and $16, although low, could still pay the bills. But now when we're talking about the cost of mortgages and interest rates and everything else and the cost of living, carbon tax, you add all of these things together, that $16 an hour that at one time may have been okay is so far from it. That $22 an hour in Dunley, BC doesn't cut it anymore. And it's because under this government, after the 8 years of this government, life has got so unfriendly to Canadian families because the cost of living just continues to explode. It doesn't matter if you are buying something at the grocery store or anything that you touch. It has been a huge increase in cost due to this Liberal government and their horrific policies that are continue to affect Canadians. Madam Speaker, how many more minutes? 39 seconds. Well, basically, at the end of this, I want to start off with one last thing, and this was something that I found also in the newspaper. And it's the quote, it's the headline that says, Ontario will be short 8,500 ECEs by 2026. So we have a problem here. If we do not have a labor strategy, if we're not going to figure out how we're going to do this together, we are not going to impact the children's lives that this government is trying to impact. We're not going to make it easier for families. So I want to say, We can do better. Let's start listening and let's start working together. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to thank my colleague across the way. She and I always have very meaningful conversations when it comes to women's issues, families and children, and I always value what she has to add to the discussion, including tonight. But, Madam Speaker, let's be realistic. The demand for childcare spaces existed far before. The demand was already there. And frankly, tax credits don't build spaces, and they don't build a workforce. And previously, Conservative governments, they ripped up agreements into previously under the Stephen Harper government from Minister Dryden when he did them. And we have to build the system. This legislation is about enshrining those values to make sure there are federal dollars and a federal commitment to continue to build that system. Doesn't she value that?
Yeah, a member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Well, first of all, I would like to say that happy 20th birthday to my son, Christian Vecchio. He's out there today, so happy birthday, Christian. And then the reason I say this is because his older brother is probably still on that waiting list that I put him on in 1994. And that's the concern that we have here is, yes, this government, this previous government under Chrétien, under Martin, all of these different things continue to promise time and time and time again. Dakota never got into that childcare, and now he's 29 years old. It just continued to exist. This government has been here for multiple years, 8 years, and it is getting worse. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member Skeena Bulkley Valley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague from Elgin, Middlesex, London for her remarks. I can't wait for the interpretation to email her and ask the spelling of Schneike. I appreciated that she talked about the conditions of work for early childhood educators. My mom was an early childhood educator. My sister-in-law is an early childhood educator. And we don't pay early childhood educators nearly enough. It's not only that the cost of living has gone up, it's the fact that 10 years ago we didn't pay early childhood educators enough, and we still don't. There's language in the bill, thanks to an NDP amendment, that references the conditions of work as being essential to ensuring the success of this program. I wonder if she could help me understand if there are other ways that this bill could be improved to ensure that early childhood educators are properly compensated for the important role that they play.
For Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Thank you very much, and I do really appreciate that because I recall back in the 90s looking at agreements, and at that time the city of St. Thomas was being compared to the city of Woodstock, where we're trying to say what should these rates be, looking at the cost of living. But when we want to talk about a labor strategy, and with all due respect, I know that there was an amendment put in there. I've heard from my colleagues, we've talked about a labor strategy amendment that was denied by this government. Thank you very much. Government, NDP, and everybody else. Thank you.
Comments? The honourable member for Barrie Innisfil.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable colleague for her speech tonight. But she did touch on something. We were both elected in 2015, and the partisan games that are played around this place when good ideas are presented, and it shouldn't matter whether it comes from the Liberals, the NDP, the Conservatives, or the Greens, if those ideas benefit Canadian families. And some of the amendments that we proposed in committee that were rejected by the NDP Liberal coalition, should it matter if it does benefit Canadian families? Who proposes these amendments to make legislation better?
Good question.
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London has just a little over a minute to respond.
Well, thank you very much, and to my colleague, it's been wonderful working here with him for almost 8 years, and all of the things that we have seen. But when we talk about partisan games, this is exactly what we see. When we see good things being brought in by other parties, specifically the party that I am a member of, proud to be a member of this Conservative Party, because we are Conservatives, it's bottom line. I get people come up, you must be a Liberal. No one owns being one party or another. The Conservative women have great ideas, and we know that we can work collaboratively with everybody so that we can get this going and so that we can work for Canadians. Thank you very much.
Resuming debate, the honourable